The footprints in the snow. For over 7 years, my fiancé and I have lived in my childhood home, an old brick house nestled deep in the woods. The property borders a massive forest, and while I've always loved the isolation, something strange started happening shortly after we moved in. It began one winter morning when I noticed a trail of barefoot footprints in the snow. They led from the woods to my car and back, as if someone had walked directly to my vehicle and then retreated. I was baffled. My fiancé hadn't made them, and no one else should have been out there. I brushed it off, thinking it might have been an animal, but the prints looked unmistakably human. A few years later, in 2015, it happened again, this time on a much larger scale. The entire yard was covered in barefoot prints. They circled the house, approached the windows, and even led to my shed, where tools had gone missing. I was shaken but tried to stay calm. My fiancé was terrified, and I knew I had to do something. Armed with my rifle, I followed the trail into the woods, but it split into 2 paths, as if there were multiple people. I turned back, unsure of what I was dealing with. The police were no help. Without evidence of a crime, they couldn't do much. We tried to move on, but the memory of those footprints haunted us. Then, in January of this year, it happened again. The footprints returned, and more tools were stolen. This time, I called my friend Theo, an experienced hunter, to help me track whoever was responsible. We ventured deep into the woods, following the trail until it split again. Theo had a thermal scope, and after hours of tracking, we saw something horrifying. 4 figures huddled in the snow. 2 were large and hunched over, while the smaller ones clung to a tree. They were naked, eating something, and their movements were unnatural. We hid until they disappeared into the woods. The police searched the area the next day but found nothing. My fiancé and I are now considering moving. We don't know who or what those figures were, but we can't keep living like this. The Pacific Crest Trail Nightmare. Last summer, I decided to hike a section of the Pacific Crest Trail. I've always loved solo hiking, but this trip turned into a nightmare. The first few days were fine, but on the 3rd night, I woke up with a strange feeling that something was wrong. I discovered my wallet was missing. Over the next few days, more items disappeared: lighters, knives, energy bars. Someone was stalking me. The paranoia set in. I started hallucinating, hearing footsteps, seeing shadows, even stepping into imaginary puddles. One night, I heard someone walking around my campsite. I grabbed my rifle but was too scared to confront them. The next morning, I decided to hike through the night to reach my car. As I walked in the dark, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a figure dart behind a tree. When I aimed my rifle and shouted, the man stepped forward. He was wearing my missing shorts, his skin scratched and his face covered in hair. He lunged at me, and I fired a warning shot. He fled into the woods, and I ran to my car. I haven't gone hiking since. The hallucinations and the encounter with that man still haunt me. If you're planning to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, be cautious, and maybe don't go alone. The Logger's Terror. My best friend's dad was a logger in the Pacific Northwest. He and his co-worker, Griffin, were assigned to a remote job site high in the mountains. The area was so isolated it took weeks just to clear a road for their equipment. One day, they started hearing strange chatter over their radios. The voices were muffled at first but grew clearer over time. They also found signs of previous visitors, footprints, makeshift campsites, and a hidden tent. Inside the tent, they discovered disturbing items: children's underwear, duct tape, rope, and sketches of children being molested. The radio chatter continued, and one night, my friend's dad confronted the men over the radio. There was silence, and the next night, someone tried to break into their camper. 2 men attacked them, slashing my friend's dad across the face with a knife. Griffin fought them off, and the men fled into the woods. They reported the attack, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, a co-worker was found raped and murdered. No arrests were ever made. My friend's dad still struggles with PTSD, and the experience has left me terrified of the deep woods.